Welcome, this is Mary with Happy Pine Soap. Today we're going to be covering a huge topic that's so important in soap making, and it's trace. We're going to be going over what trace is and why it's so important for successful soap making. We're going to talk about what causes trace to speed up or slow down, and some really common factors that contribute to soaping disasters or when things go terribly wrong. And finally, the last part of my video, I will show you step by step one of my favorite recipes that happens to have a fast trace, and I'll show you some of my favorite tips and tricks for how you can successfully navigate a recipe that is going to move fast. I really hope you find this information useful, and let's go ahead and get started. Trace, very simply, is basically the point at which your oils and your lye solution have been blended together well enough or emulsified and they no longer separate. So basically your soap batter is finally reached a place of stability where the oils and the lye are fully mixed and will not separate. There are 3 types of trace, and the bottom 2 you see there in red and pink we'll talk about in just a minute. But the 3 main types of trace are light, medium, and thick. Light trace is great for swirls and complicated designs that require lots of time. And this batter is very watery. The solution itself is very, very liquidy. Medium trace is more similar to cake batter. It can suspend additives like walnut shells, or it's great for soaps like confetti soaps where you want to put additional soap chunks in it. And then thick trace is really similar to thick pudding. It is going to set up a lot faster. It's great for textured tops if you like those fancy soap tops and your layered soap designs. A really neat visual explanation of why trace is so important is to show you some soaps I already made. So ones that were very complex here, that had lots of swirls, that look very detailed. These are going to require very thin traces. So very thin trace that stays fluid for a long period of time, like this one easily took me about 30 minutes of working time here. This is the spin swirl design. This is going to need a trace that stays fluid for a very long time. Other types of designs as well that are going to need a very thin trace that stays fluid is the watercolor design. We have the recent soap challenge one here. This one requires a very thin trace as well. This is also a really neat kind of raindrop effect. So this particular design also requires a very fluid trace. We have the One Pot Wonder. This is also another one that's going to require a light trace that stays light to medium for enough to pour all the colors. And then some of the designs that require a thicker trace are going to be your layered designs. So layers do really well with medium to thick trace. And if you want some fancy soap tops, you're going to also need medium to thick trace. So like these ones, especially like this one here, if I had tried to do this very thin trace that this batter required in this design, it wouldn't work. Your layers would not set up and you would not be able to get this really cool soap top here. So thick trace is not bad. It's just a different type of trace that you're going to need for soaps that have fancy tops that are textured and for layers to support one another, or for embeds. You see how this has embedded soap beds. You're not going to be able to do embeds with soap batters that are very, very fluid. They won't support the embeds. Now I wanted to talk about 2 bad types of trace. So these are types of trace you don't want to have. False trace is when your soap batter has not reached an emulsion, and in fact it can still separate at this point. And you will notice this if you see any streaks of oil left in the batter. That means you are not quite at an emulsification yet. So that's false trace. And the second one is called soap on a stick. And this is usually caused by some sort of fragrance that you're using that has misbehaved and accelerates rapidly. And basically your soap goes from fluid to as literally hard as a brick within seconds sometimes. And it's impossible to pour it, and it can ruin a whole batch even. Trace is oftentimes so difficult for beginners, so I went back and got these clips from my past soap videos so that you could see the different types of trace. This is the emulsion stage. So this is when you've stick blended it just enough for it to be fully emulsified. It's not at light trace yet. So the batter will immediately sink below the surface and you're not seeing any trailings on the surface yet. So this is perfect for complex designs. Light trace is the next one. So this is where, as you can see, I'm getting some slight traces on the surface when I drop the soap batter down, but it doesn't really sink too much. You know, it just is that beautiful fluid consistency. Medium trace is more than that. This is going to be a little bit thicker, more like cake batter. And as you can see, not only does it stay on the surface, but it even holds its shape a little bit. Medium to thick is even more than that. As you can see, it's really beginning to hold its shape. This is like perfect for soap tops. And that thick trace is the thickest I would recommend for, say, layered soaps or embedded soaps. And the last one is soap on a stick. This one, I'll be talking more about that in this video. This one went from what you see here to literally hard as a brick within a few more seconds after this. So that is what we're trying to avoid. And this thumbnail here is from one of my earlier soap videos on my channel. I had a horrible, disastrous soaping session, so I have that video included in the description below for anybody who'd like to see that as well. Okay, let's talk about some of the things that can impact our trace. We're going to have a combination of oils, temperature, your room temperature that you're soaping in, your speed of your blending, your water in your recipe, and specific fragrances or additives that can really combine together to either make a winning recipe or a disastrous soaping fail. Feel free to pause this slide if you would like to read through it a little bit slower, but I also will be going into detail about each one in the next coming slides right after this one as well. So no need to worry. I will be talking more about each one. Okay, so this is a image that I've taken from one of my recipes in SoapCalc. So if you don't know how to use SoapCalc, that is going to be one of your biggest things that you will benefit from learning how to do so. I have a video on how to use SoapCalc and how to create your own recipes, and I'll list that in the description below as well. So the first thing that you're going to be noticing in your upper left-hand corner is the lye solution. So your lye concentration, the higher that number, 50% is the max. The higher that number, the less water in your recipe. So if you have less water, your recipe is going to move a lot faster. So the lower that number, that lye concentration, say around 33% instead of this 40%, well, a 33% or lower means you're going to have more water in the recipe and it's going to move slower. So that's what you might want to adjust and change if you want to slow down a recipe. Another thing here you see on the right-hand side, in the upper right-hand side of the image, are the oils used in your recipe. So these are super important. Your hard oils, so those are your oils that are solid at room temperature, those are going to be higher in saturated fats, and those equal faster trace. So hard oils, usually, the more of those in a recipe, the faster it's going to move. And the more soft oils, or those that are liquid at room temperature, if you have more liquid oils in your recipe, those are going to cause trace to be a little bit slower. So a slower moving recipe usually has a higher percentage of those soft oils as opposed to the hard oils. And then the last one in the lower right-hand corner you see are your oil types. So these are your fatty acid profiles of each of the fatty acids in a recipe. So each one of your oils are going to be made up of a combination of the lauric, the myristic, palmitic, stearic, ricinoleic, oleic, linoleic, and linolenic. So those are your fatty acid profiles. And as you see, I have circled the ones in red are the ones that accelerate trace. So those are your saturated ones. And the ones that are circled below that and with the stars are your softer oils, and those are going to slow down trace. So it's really helpful to be able to read and understand SoapCalc, because that's going to tell you in a nutshell what your soap recipe is going to do, whether it's going to move fast or slower. And you can adjust it as needed as well if you know how to use SoapCalc. And again, I have a great video on that, and I'll list it below in the description. Some oils that I decided to include here so you could get a snapshot of some of the common oils and what they might do. The ones that might speed up your recipe are those hard oils like coconut oil, palm kernel flakes, palm oil, cocoa butter, shea butter. Castor oil is a unique one in that even though it's soft, it will definitely speed up if used in a high percentage in the recipe. And the oils that typically slow down trace are those soft oils. So again, olive oil, that high oleic sunflower oil, almond oil, avocado oil. So those are some common oils as well that will affect the trace of your recipe. Temperature is another huge factor that can speed up trace or slow it down. Ideally, for newer soapers, soaping below that 110 degrees Fahrenheit is best for trying to control your trace more easily. You can soap at higher temperatures, say at 120 or above, but that really risks not only soap volcanoes where your soap overheats or things like cracking, but also your trace can be way too fast to control easily as well. And then soaping below 85 degrees Fahrenheit presents another risk. So this can create false trace where you think you've reached trace, but you actually haven't. And I never really soap below, certainly not below 85, but I really like to keep my oils warm at around 95 degrees. That seems to be a pretty good middle ground for me, so that some of the hard oils do not start to harden back up after you've warmed them. Your room temperature that you're soaping in can also impact trace. So if you're soaping in the summer and your room is really hot that you're soaping in, that can speed up trace, or vice versa. If you're soaping in a cold room and it's in the winter, that can possibly slow down your trace. So these are some other factors to consider as well. The stick blender is an amazing invention. It makes soaping so much faster and easier. However, it can be overdone, and you can really accidentally thicken a soap batter way too fast where there's really nothing that can be done to save it, so it's better to underblend. And by that, I mean just using the stick blender in a few second bursts at a time than running it for too long and then having your soap batter get way too thick. And then there's nothing you can do other than to flop it in the mold as fast as possible and hope for the best. So less blending and being careful with it is really the best way to approach this when you're a new soaper. The amount of water in a soap recipe is huge when it comes to trace. So again, the more water that you have in the recipe, the slower your trace will be. And basically for complex designs, you probably want a lye solution of anywhere from 25 to 33% to provide yourself with ample time to work. And again, the opposite is true if you have less water. So if you have a very steep water discount or a very high lye solution, with 50% of course being the max, you're going to have a lot faster trace. There's some benefits, of course, to having less water, namely that the soda ash is almost completely reduced if you have the highest lye concentration possible. But again, there's always risk and rewards to adjusting any of these water amounts. One of the biggest things that most soapers figure out, and sometimes pretty quickly, is that fragrances can make or break a recipe. You could have the perfect soap recipe that behaves perfectly, and you pair that with a misbehaving fragrance that accelerates, and you can have soap on a stick and an absolute disaster in seconds. So I cannot overestimate how important researching your fragrances before you start your recipe. So things like spicy, floral, or ozone notes in your fragrance oil are those that speed up trace. Rose is one of the most infamous for creating soap on a stick situations. So that is one of the trickiest ones to work with. If you are a new soaper, I would suggest avoiding accelerating fragrances. On the flip side are fragrances that decelerate or slow down your trace. These are really handy if you have a complex design that you need even a little bit of extra working time. So you might want to move to one of these essential oils listed. These can slow down trace, and they're very handy if you need a recipe to behave itself for long periods of time. One thing that I did want to mention in this video is how important it is to research your fragrance before you start to work with it so that you don't have any unexpected surprises with your trace. This happens to be the fragrance that I use in the video that will be coming shortly after this. This fragrance accelerates, and it did cause some major problems in the batter. So one thing that I like to do before I start a recipe is I go on the manufacturer's website. I'm going to look at the maximum usage rates to make sure that I'm using the safe percentage amount. I also am going to go to the cold process soap testing notes. Most manufacturer pages like Brambleberry, and this is Midwest Fragrances. I believe Wholesale Supplies is another one that has fragrances, but they will all have these type of notes and information that is super important and helpful for planning a soap recipe. Notice under the cold process soap testing notes tab that it says that this fragrance does accelerate, it doesn't have any type of ricing, and it does discolor a little bit to a light tan, and it does mention that the trace is quick. So it's telling you basically maybe this fragrance here might be good for layered or single colored designs. So it's going to help you kind of figure out, okay, don't use this fragrance for a complex design. And the last thing I like to check before I start a recipe is the reviews. A lot of customers are really helpful in that they will leave reviews of just how well or poorly a fragrance behaves. And notice for this fragrance that I will be showing you shortly in my actual soap video that follows this, this person says that this fragrance did accelerate and that it accelerated fast. So that's exactly what I noticed as well. So again, thank you to the people who leave reviews about how these fragrances behave. That is very helpful to the rest of us. Okay, and the last thing I wanted to make note of are additives. So additives are things like your clays, titanium dioxide, and certain pigments. These all can impact trace and cause it to speed up. I've even noticed that some of my colors with micas, some micas actually cause a little bit of acceleration compared to other micas. So some of this you just kind of learn through trial and error as you go about making different batches. We are almost to the part where I begin to show you my soap recipe from scratch. And before we do that, I thought I'd show you a few already made videos on my channel. These are the thumbnails. And these are all recipes that are great demonstrations of recipes that behave very nicely and have slow trace. And these are just a couple of videos that demonstrate fast trace. These are, again, already available on my channel. These are the thumbnails of the videos. And these, again, are those layered soaps that are great for embeds and soap tops. And they will give you an idea of what that thicker trace looks like and what it's like to work with it. Okay, we're on to the video where I make the actual soap recipe and show you how I troubleshoot a difficult recipe that I know is going to have problems with trace and acceleration. I like to add all of my micas to a little bit of sweet almond oil, and I like to get them pre-mixed before I start my actual soaping. The reason for that is when I know I have a recipe that is going to move fast, I like to get everything lined up and ready so that I don't have to worry about it later and have the soap get away from me. We're using Very Berry Bliss, and copper sparkle mica will be used to create some mica lines. This recipe also has a high amount of butters and hard oils, so those are going to move faster. I melt the hard oils to about 140. Then I like to add my soft oils. And here you see I have split the total amount of oils into 4 separate batches. I've also split the lye solution into 4 separate batches. And I have them all lined up and ready to go because this recipe is going to move fast. Here you see me also splitting the fragrance by 4 equal amounts as well and adding it to the separate oil amounts. Splitting a batch up like this is great for controlling trace because I'm not actually going to add the lye solution until I am ready to pour each layer. So essentially I will put the color in first as well, get that nice and blended into the warm oils. And again, that lye solution has not touched the oils yet, so there's no saponification going on, so I don't have to worry about trace just yet. Adding your colorants in before you add the lye is also a great tip so that the color is evenly mixed, because when soap batter moves too fast, sometimes you cannot actually get the colorants mixed in properly. So this is another good tip to use for fast moving batter. This is just a quick clip of what I was doing for my tilted layers, which is basically propping your mold on a folded towel or another surface that's elevated. I started with my lye solution around 84 degrees Fahrenheit, and my oils were about 98 degrees Fahrenheit. I wanted to point out that I kept my warm oils below 100 degrees. I did this to try to make sure the trace was slowed down. And I also stick blended just for some short bursts. I didn't want to overblend. Again, this is a small amount of soap as well, so you have to be careful not to overdo it. This is about 2.5 pounds of soap that we're making today. Unfortunately, this is where I noticed that the fragrance was going to cause soap on a stick. So if you see your batter start to get hard immediately, you want to get it in the mold as fast as possible. That's the only way to save it at this point. So I tossed it in there and tried to smooth it out as best as I could. At this point, you really can only scrape it out with a spatula and do your best to smooth it. There is no pourable soap going in the mold here, so it's just a matter of doing the best you can. So this is where I am super glad that I decided to do this design in layers. If I had not decided to do it in layers, the other pour containers, say hypothetically, if I had put the lye solution in the other pour containers, every single pour container would have had rock hard soap and it would not have been able to be accomplished whatsoever. It would have been ruined. So, it's a good thing that I decided to do a layered design because I really don't have to worry about the warm oils that are sitting aside. They don't have lye in them, so they're just waiting for me to get to them when I get to them. So this is the next color. I've added the additional mica to the warm oils, mixed it. We're checking the temp, and again, right about that below 100 degrees. We're adding our room temperature lye solution, and we're ready to blend the next layer. And this time I did even less stick blending. I want it to barely be emulsified because, as we see, this fragrance causes rapid acceleration. One other thing you could do to slow down trace and control it a bit more is add your fragrance after you're done stick blending. So this particular time I added the fragrance before I stick blended. That was probably a mistake. I could have slowed down the trace a bit more if I had waited to add the fragrance after I stick blended the solution. This one is also very, very thick. And again, this is all happening within seconds. This is not left on the counter for more than, 5 or 10 seconds, and it gets this thick that quickly. So that's what we mean when we say soap on a stick. And then give it another few seconds, and as you see, it is pretty much rock hard. Now we're on to the third layer. Once again, I've added my Premixed Mica color to the warm oils. I go ahead and blend it. And then we're ready to add our lye solution. Third and green layer also set up just as rapidly as the other two. So it takes some smoothing with the spatula. I went ahead and added another mica line to this layer. The fourth and final layer is our top layer. It is that beautiful blue color. I did pour this one when it was a little bit more liquidy. I just had to speed it up a bit more basically. And this entire recipe hardens up so fast that it's ready to cut in about 4 hours. I did notice some discoloration at the bottom of the bars, and thankfully I'm pretty sure this is the fragrance oil that is discoloring because it did go away and fade in a couple of days. So that's the good news here. It's just a temporary discoloration. You will notice that there's air pockets in the soap, which can happen when our acceleration and trace is rapid. You will have the soap basically trap air pockets in it because the batter itself is not liquidy enough to, form a really nice solid bar. But that's okay. You can cut off the ends like I did, which cuts off a lot of the air pockets. And then as you see, I'm beveling it here with just a simple vegetable peeler. It adds a very nice feel to the bars, makes them a lot softer in the hands when we're washing with them, and it just looks nice too. And as you can see, I waited a little bit over 24 hours and some of the discoloration is already fading. So I expect this will probably continue fading, the discoloration. This is probably due to the fragrance oil. That usually is what causes discoloration here. And I've had it happen to other soaps before, and if we're lucky, it will completely disappear in about a week. So, but otherwise, it's cosmetic only. So if it doesn't fade, that's okay too. I'm just using these for my family. So yeah, not really a big deal. And as you can see, the really pretty mica lines here. Those are really, really pretty in this design. It's a fun way to get some extra detail in a layered soap. Even though this recipe happens to accelerate rapidly, it is one of my favorites. The high amount of butters in this make it so wonderfully nourishing and silky soft on your hands when you use it and in the bath. I just adore it. It's actually one of my favorite recipes. So I really hope you enjoyed my video. I hope you found all the information on trace helpful. If you did, feel free to leave a comment below. Feel free to subscribe if you haven't. I try to release soaping content on a regular basis. And as always, I look forward to seeing you all in the next soapy video. Have a great evening, everybody.